Hello, ladies and gents. We're on the module A225, Block 3, Decline 1880 to 1914, edited by Robin Mackie. Page 27, sorry. The Crofters' War. Belfast was not the only part of United Kingdom by violence in the summer of 1886. That May, a farm of the island of Tiree, off Scotland's west coast, was occupied by over 300 crofters, who immediately divided land. When 40 policemen were landed on the island in July, they were surrounded by a large crowd besieged in the local inn overnight and forced to leave the next day. Only when the policemen returned with a force of over 200 Marines could the ringleaders be arrested. Hunter, 1976. Later in the year, trouble rose in the Isle of Skye, and again Marines were required to back up the police. In the autumn of 1887, it was the turn of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. A band of up to 70 landless islanders, some armed, occupied the large park estate, killing as many deer as possible so as to destroy the value of the shooting estate and reclaim land they regarded as theirs. Hunter, 1976. Soldiers and Marines were again dispatched. Although the park occupation was abandoned before the soldiers could get there, they were soon needed elsewhere on Lewis. In the first week of January 1888, a battle was fought between police and soldiers and around 1,000 islanders at Agnish on the east coast. During the next weeks, unrest spread of the avowed object. According to an official report to the Scottish Office of Obtaining Possession, if by necessary, if necessary by violence, the land presently occupied by sheep, farms, or deer forests. These incidents come to be known as the Crofters' War. Although, as in the Irish Land War, violence or its threat was only one in a range of tactics. The Western Highlands were sparsely populated and at the outmost fringes of the British state. Only for a very short time did their concerns command much attention in London. This section, however, will show how the had raised had raised had wilder implications and changed assumptions, but progressed and modernity. The, the origins of the Crofters' War went back to the autumn of 1881, when a conflict over grazing rights had arisen on the Braes estate in Skye. To the Crofters passed the land on the hill above their villages was there by custom, while the local landowner, Lord Macdonald, saw his property rights as absolute, so that he was free to lease the land to whom he wished. When he turned down a petition from the Crofters and chose to continue renting the land to a sheep farmer, the tenants withheld their rent. A sheriff officer was sent to serve eviction orders, but was prevented by a large crowd who took and burned the orders. Fearing the spread of agitation similar to that in Ireland, a force of Glasgow policemen was dispatched to Skye, resulting in a bloody encounter which became known as the Battle of the Braes. Divine 1994. Rent strikes soon spread to other parts of Skye, the Outer Hebrides, and the West Coast mainland. A gunship and Marines were first dispatched to Skye in early 1883, when the police proved quite unable to enforce rent collection or eviction orders. The two photographs produced as figures 16.6 and 16.7 belong to the collection of the Aberdeen photographer George Washington Wilson, 1821 to 1893, and were taken in the early 1880s. Wilson found a ready market for his many photos of landscapes in the Scottish Highlands, but also took pictures of buildings and people. In the figure 16.6, it shows the traditional black house with stones to anchor the thatched roof against the wind, which I'll show you right here. That's this one here. The quantity of oats raised by the crofter is a good season is not large and not infrequently as a result of an unfavourable season of the ravages of deer. It is too insignificant to take the mill. In such a case, the clutch quash hand grinder is brought into realisation. The two photographs illustrate a harsh way of life. The lantern slide notes also emphasise the poverty involved. It is important to note the cultural distance between the subjects and the photographer. The photos are made for the local inhabitants. It must have been posed. The photographer is documenting a way of life that will have seemed primitive and stepped in tradition to its likely middle class or upper class viewers. The land issue in the 1880s. The immediate reason for trouble in the early 1880s, as the west of Ireland, was bad harvests, as in the 1840s. The potato crop in 1881 was affected by blight, while grain crops were badly damaged by storms in late summer. Equally disastrous, however, was the failure of the East Coast herring fishing industry, where many crofters found summer work, which had some become an essential supplement to their income. By early 1882, extreme poverty was reported for many parts of the West Highlands, and repeat of the famine of the 1840s seemed possible. As in Ireland, however, the local response this time was different. Once started, protests against landlords spread rapidly, and, as in Ireland, the protests soon found outside support from radicals elsewhere in Scotland, many of them born in the Highlands or the sons of emigrants. Highland newspapers such as the Highlander and the Oban Times voiced ferociously supported the crofters' cause. It was also found support in some lowland papers. A renewed interest in Celtic culture fueled such support, not least in transforming lowland perceptions of the clearances. What many lowland Scots at the time had seen as a necessary response to the inadequate food supply has come to be seen as a national tragedy. The Highland Land Law Reform Association was set up by the eminent radicals and Gaelic revivalists in London early 1883. This was transformed from the intellectual elite pressure group into the activist force when links were made to crofters. Interestingly, a key breakthrough came at a meeting of 2,000 West Highland crofters in August 1883 as Fraser Burr on Scotland's east coast concerning the herring fishery. The annual migration of thousands of men and women from the Highland to work in fishing had broken down the Highlanders' traditional isolation. The meeting resolved to set up branches in the crofting parishes. By the following year, the HLLRA had 5,000 members in the Highland counties. Two contemporaries. The parallels with Ireland seem striking, both in Ireland and in the Highlands. Land agitation was strongest in the most remote areas and come from communities it was easy for the Britain to see as primitive and doomed to decline. And in both areas, the agitation was too quick to adopt new methods such as the rent strikes and boycotts, tactics that were surprisingly effective. In the Highland too, the agitation took on a political dimension. As in other rural areas of the United Kingdom, 1885 election proved transformative. In the Sutherland County constituency, for instance, the electorate grew from 326 to 10,011. A small tenant obtained the vote. Tinley 2010. Under these circumstances, landlords found it very difficult to get returned as MPs, and 4 of the 5 Highland seats were captured by candidates of the Crofters Party. Yet there were also significant differences between the Highlands and Ireland. First, the issues were not quite the same. Although the 3 Fs, free sale, fair rent, and fixity of tenure, which you may recall from the discussion of Ireland in Unit 9, were important in Scotland too. The key issue was always a shortage of land. In the crofters' eyes, they had been driven off the best land during the clearances, and what they were left with was too little and too poor to make a decent living. Second, whereas many landowners in the west of Ireland were relatively small scale and improvised, some of the Highland landowners were among the most wealthy and powerful in the UK. At their apex were the Dukes of Argyll and Sutherland, both with extensive connections in politics and at court. The 8th Duke of the Argyll, 1823 to 1900, was a Liberal cabinet member for nearly 20 years. And his son was married to a daughter of the Queen. The two dukes owned 175,000 acres and 1,350 acres. Respectively, the 3rd Duke of Sutherland, 1828 to 1892, was the largest landowner in Western Europe until 2008. And if some other landowners were struggling and had to set up highland estates, were in demand among the newly rich as shooting estates. Grouse and deer hunting brought upper-class tourists to the highland. Despite the distance of the apparent strangeness of their inhabitants, the highlands had in fact never been so well known to Britain elite. The Crofters campaign received a surprisingly quick response. As early as the spring of 1888, the Liberal government set up a royal commission to inquire into the condition of the crofters and coters in the Highland and Island of Scotland. Both added. The Napier Commission, named after its chairman, reported to Parliament in 1884. The government's first response was to see if landlords themselves would offer concession. When they were not forthcoming, the Crofters Holding Scotland Act was passed in 1886, like the Irish Land Acts. It enshrined the three Fs, set up a commission to review rents and arrears, and established some provision for enlarging crofts. Over time, this commission, which was titled the Crofters Commission, did reduce tensions. However, it did not address the land shortage and so did not end the agitation, particularly in areas such as Lewis, where there were many landless coters. After 1888, an upturn in the fishing industry, where, as we have seen, many crofters found extra work, led to the Dominion in conflict. But land raids continued despite further legislation and flared up again before and immediately after the First World War. The clearances and how they were remembered hung heavily over the whole issue, shaping all responses. Not only did their injustice form the basis of the Crofters case, but they also ensured their much sympathy in urban Scotland and indeed the wider United Kingdom, and inhabited the response of many landowners. Anna Tinley, 2010, notes how anxious the Duke of Sutherland was to avoid any bad publicity. The government, too, was keen to define the problem as a particular Highland one, justifying legislation in 1886 covering the Highland counties alone by arguing that the region had a distinct tradition of communal tenancies. Cameron, 1997. Similarly, legislation for Ireland was justified in terms of the distinct needs of a region that was perceived as feral. Page 33. Yet, if clearly were some distinct elements to the Highland land issue, the connection of land ownership was not confined to any one country in the United Kingdom. The extreme figures of Scotland included not only huge Highland estates, but also the large lowland and border landholdings, such as the Duke of Buccleuch, while aristocrats such as the Dukes of the Devonshire and Northumberland held huge properties in England. Nor were all estates rural. The Duke of Westminster, for instance, owned highly valuable land in London's West End. David Cannadine, 1990, argues that there was probably no other European country where land ownership was as concentrated in this period. Nor was it only in the Highlands and Ireland that the land was a political issue in the 1880s. Wales had its tiff wars about the tenant payments to an established Anglican church, which had few adherents. Patricia Lynch has also shown the Third Reform Act of 1884 made it possible for the Liberal Party to campaign successfully in English county seats in 1885, with the slogan 3 acres and a cow. And that rural radicalism was a continuing theme in British politics. Land ownership was an issue for urban electors too, many of whom were first or second generation immigrants from rural areas. Land and a related issue of the taxation of wealth was to remain an important current in political discourse throughout the period until 1914. Particularly for the Liberal Party, the proposal of the American radical Henry George, 1839 to 1897, for a single tax on the unearned profits of land rents was widely discussed across all nations in the United Kingdom. The government's solution of passing special legislation for the Highlands and Islands was justified in terms of their remoteness and backwardness. They were identified as regions with unusual problems that required tailored solutions. Over time, the legislation and, probably more importantly, high immigration reduced these conflicts. But as Canadine points out, the 1880s were a turning point for landowning aristocracies across Europe, after which they were on the defensive, not least in the face of for a newly assertive peasantry. Land reform became a major political issue where elsewhere in Europe and in most countries, large estates were eventually broken up. From this perspective, it was extensive estates that were increasingly archaic, and it was their survival in Britain that was anomalous. Nor was the survival of big estates a foregone conclusion. Many members of the British aristocracy became increasingly convinced that they were uniquely threatened by the forces of democracy. In the final decades of the 19th century, this was to be a political factor in the years before the First World War. As will be explored in Unit 21, it is also important to notice the modern elements of the Crofters campaign, the importance of literacy and the focus of publicity, the alliance with urban radicals, and the successful change to the untrammeled rights of property in some ways, not least their combination of popular agitation with parliamentary success and their emphasis on state intervention. It was rural radicals who led the popular challenge in decades following the age of Kippies. 16.4 Barry Docks and the South Wales coalfield. In events of mid-1880s in Ireland and in the Highlands seem to be contemporaries like reminders of past problems. Developments in South Wales was interpreted as harbingers of the future. Let's start with a small holiday town of Barry on the south coast of Wales near Cardiff. In 1884, a small group of coal and ship owners succeeded in having an act passed to build a new harbour here. Against the opposition of Marquis of Bute, 1847 to 1900, the owner of Cardiff Harbour and much industrial infrastructure in South Wales, docks at Barry were quickly built. The first one was completed in July 1889. Depicted in figure 16.18, together with the harbour, new rail links were built to the coalfields, bypassing Cardiff. By the end of 1889, Barry had already exported 1.1 million tonnes of coal. A second dock was completed in 1897. In 1901, trade from the new port overtook Cardiff in 1913. Just over 30 million tonnes of coal passed through Barry's docks, making it the largest coal port in the world. Not surprisingly, the venture was an extremely profitable one for its owners, paying dividends of the 10% of every year to 1930 bar one. Profero, 1984.